Hello, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. Welcome back to Ion Motive. I'll tell you what, the hardest part of doing these podcasts is just starting it because I pretty much just start it the exact same way every time, and it annoys me. I got to find new ways to mix it up, make it interesting. But anyways, let's get going with this podcast. So this is episode number 41, and today we are going to be talking about how to boost self-esteem. Honestly, a great idea for a podcast topic, and I'm not really sure why I haven't done it sooner. So, in this podcast, specifically, we're going to be talking about 5 methods that will help you boost your self-esteem. I'll be completely honest, self-esteem is never something that I've really struggled with very, very seriously. Obviously, there are times where I've struggled with things. I would even say that at one point there was something like a social anxiety where I just had a hard time being myself in front of a lot of other people, in front of people that I wasn't necessarily close with. So I don't know if that was exactly a self-esteem issue. I think I was just being more reserved. But anyways, we've all dealt with self-esteem issues in one way or another at some point in our lives. In this episode, I'm not going to try and tell you why you were or why you are struggling with your self-esteem, because I honestly don't know. It changes from person to person, and it could be a myriad of reasons. I mean, just off the top of my head, we've got life circumstances, negative self-talk, comparing yourself to others, just like I talked about in that last podcast episode. But it's probably a combination of things. I would love to do an interview with somebody who's very experienced, honestly, some kind of psychologist. Maybe we could look at root causes of self-esteem problems, but not going to do that today. I would love to do that in the future. So we are instead going to talk about specific ways to boost your self-esteem. I've got 5 ways, like I said, and I think these are going to be really helpful. So I'm excited about today's episode. I've got nothing else to share at the moment. The new year is going good. I'm really enjoying doing this podcast. I'm enjoying posting on social media again. It's been awesome. I've really enjoyed the last few weeks. So I'm going to keep it going. Now, let's get started with this episode. So the very first way that you can boost your self-esteem is change what you can. So if you're struggling with self-esteem, there is a good chance that there are immediate ways that you can improve your life that will result in boosting your self-esteem. So some problems can be addressed immediately. That's what I'm trying to say. For example, if you feel unhealthy, then there are immediate things you can do to feel more healthy, right? You can exercise, you can eat better, you can drink more water, you can sleep more. When you do those things, your body will feel better and you will feel better as a result too. Another example, if you feel lazy, do something. Literally, regardless of how small it is, do something. That's why Jordan Peterson, the guy I talk about so much on this podcast, I talk about one of the things he says is, if you're lost and you're looking to change your life, if you feel lazy, then start by making your bed. There's nothing courageous about making your bed per se, but in the act of making your bed, you're aiming up. You're trying to improve your life, and that is in fact courageous. So start with the small things, and again, build on that. Do anything if you feel lazy. So these examples might not have fit you perfectly, but look for areas that might need improvement. Another thing you can do is do more of what makes you happy. This is very helpful. Think about how you would act if you had high self-esteem and then do that. So for myself, I feel best when I'm doing my podcast, when I'm working out, when I'm spending time with friends, when I'm getting enough sleep, when I'm reading, when I'm doing all those things, I feel amazing. So try to figure out what makes you happy, what makes you feel good, and then start doing that, because there's a good chance you're missing out on some things. Finally, I do want to say this for this first talking point. You have to break the loop. Let me use an example here. If you feel like crap, if you feel like you're lazy, then you're probably not going to do anything as a result of that feeling. And now, because you're not doing anything, you're going to feel even more lazy. So this is just reinforcing. This is a very difficult pattern to break. And I think that's one of the reasons that depression is so difficult. It's negatively reinforcing. We need to get out of this negative loop. We got to get into the positive loop. So the only way to do that is to act. Action can get you in the positive loop. If I act, I'll start to feel good. And when I start to feel good, I'll act. And that is a positively reinforcing cycle. We need to get in that. Really, no easy way to break the loop than to just take action. You've got to act in one way or another. So that was my first point for today's episode. Change what you can. The next point is related. So the second point is forget what you can't change. Some things are just outside of your control. This includes, but is not limited to, facts of life or events that have happened to you in your past. In both of these scenarios, you can't change what happened or what is happening, and you can only change your response to it. So let's start with facts of life. These are things that are, it's just the way it is. That's the best way to define it. I'm going to use this example because I think it's something that most people struggle with in one way or another. You're probably unhappy with some aspect of how you look, even if it's something small. There's a chance that it bothers you. I think everybody deals with that somehow, right? I think that's fair to say. So first of all, I'm not going to go in depth with this, but the problem is not necessarily the way you look. The problem is your pattern of thinking and what you're telling yourself. I'm not going to go in depth with that because I think I'm going to talk about that in another episode. But regardless, the way you look is something you cannot change unless you're doing Botox or plastic surgery or whatever. We're not talking about that. So here's what I'm getting at. This is hard to do, but you have to let it go. So instead of dwelling on that, let it go and focus on the parts of you that you do like. There are plenty of reasons you should love yourself. You can love your imperfections. That's just a part of you. Don't let it weigh you down. You can't change it, so just change your thoughts about it instead. Now let's talk about life experiences. You can interpret painful events in a new way so that they no longer hurt you. You can actually let your pain serve you. I've got a great quote here by Virginia Satir. I hope I'm not butchering the last name. But she says, "Life is not the way it's supposed to be. It's the way it is. The way you cope with it is what makes the difference." Beautiful quote. I love that. So let's use this example. Maybe you suffered years of verbal abuse from somebody who had a position of authority. That was most definitely traumatic, I'm sure, and I'm not discounting that. I know that has caused significant pain for too many people. But thinking about it now and reminiscing on it and dwelling on it is only going to hurt you more. You can't change it. The words that people put into your head do not have to hurt you forever. So instead of focusing on the pain it's caused, think about it in a new light. Maybe those years of verbal abuse made you stronger today. And now because you suffered that, I'm not going to do that to anybody else. Now you're more kind to others, you're more loving. Maybe you've got a job because you want to help other people. This is just one example, but you can do this with any painful scenario in your life. Rather than letting it harm you further, reinterpret it. Think about it, how it's changed your life for the better. I've done this with my anxiety. I've done this with my OCD. I've done this with a number of things. And now those things don't hurt anymore. I've recognized that they've served me. They've made me a better person. Whatever it is, there was some good to them. So think about that. That was just one example, but you're able to do this with your own life. Now, let's get to point number 3, and it is this. Replace the negative self-talk with the positive self-talk. In episode 39, the one where I talked about the benefits of the gym, how to get started, things like that, I talked about this thing called the ICR process, and I'm going to talk about it again here, in case you missed that. So the ICR process stands for something. It stands for Identify, Challenge, and Replace. This is a process that you can use when you have a negative thought. So I'll lay it out for you. I'll explain it right here. So for the I, identify the negative thought and determine how it's making you feel. Once you do this, you can challenge it with reason. So think about the realistic scenario. Think about what's actually going on and challenge that negative thought. I admit that this is helpful, but usually reason is not enough. So then you need to replace that negative thought with a new one that empowers you. And I think it's great to use some kind of affirmation type thought. I'll just come up with an example on the fly to make this more clear. So for identify, let's just say I tell myself this podcast sucks. And I do that sometimes. So this is going to work well. So let me just say, man, this podcast sucks. I'm never going to be good, blah, blah, blah. That's my negative thought. And that's making me feel like crap. So I'm going to challenge it. I might do this by saying, hey, I'm relatively new to this. I'm just doing this on my free time. It's getting better each week. I'm helping others. So that's good. Now that I've challenged it, I'm going to then replace the negative thought with an empowering one. So for that, I might come up with the idea, this podcast is not necessarily where I want to be, but I have improved dramatically since I've started, and I'm improving every week. I'm improving every time I put out a new episode. You can do this with any negative thought that you have. So this is a great process you can use. Make sure you remember this for sure if this is something that you struggle with. Another thing that will help you, talk to yourself the way you would talk to a child, a friend, or a loved one. This is something I do struggle with. I'm not going to lie. So going back to the podcast example, I do tell myself those things. I tell myself I'm lazy. I tell myself I'm not helping anyone. I tell myself that this podcast is shit and that no one listens to it. I really do that. So let's flip the roles here. Let's say I had a friend who was doing the Ion Motive podcast. Let's say I wasn't doing it. They were doing it. I would never tell my friend, hey, you're lazy, you're not helping anyone, and your podcast sucks. That's just wrong. I wouldn't be a good friend. I wouldn't have that friend for long. So talk to yourself in a loving and caring way. If you're having a hard time doing this, then you might have to change your environment. And I mean this literally in terms of the people you spend time with, or in terms of what you're listening to. If you're watching TV shows, if you're hanging out with people who just spew negativity, then you need to get out of that. That's going to make it more difficult for you to be more positive with yourself. Start by listening to positive people and hanging out with positive people, listening to positive music, positive podcasts. That was a bit of a tongue twister. But start doing those things. Your environment matters as well for this. That's all I got for point number 3. Let's move to point number 4, a big one. And it is this, plain and simple, you have got to forgive yourself. This is something a lot of people struggle with. I struggle with. And it's probably the most difficult. It's probably the biggest challenge for me in terms of my self-esteem. I'll be honest. There are things that, I feel ashamed of, I feel guilty for. And I hold on to that. I know a lot of people do. I think guilt is one of the most difficult emotions to really process and overcome. So all I want to say is this. You've got to give yourself grace and forgive yourself. Again, like I said earlier, there are some things you can't change, and you can't change the past. So don't hold on to it forever. Just let it go. And instead of thinking of it in a way that hurts you, think of your mistakes as lessons. So use guilt as a guide. If you're going to remember anything from this podcast, it's this. Use guilt as a guide and let it serve you. So rather than feel the pain and shame, use the feeling to guide how you act in the future. So if you feel guilt, don't beat yourself up for it. Instead, reinterpret it in a new light. So now I know that I won't do this again in the future, and I will act more properly. So this changes the negative feeling of guilt to at least a feeling of a neutral feeling, and even potentially positive. Reinterpret it so that you can move forward and forget about it and let it go. So that was short and sweet. That's all I've got for number 4. Now let's go to number 5. Another big point. I just said, hey, if you're going to remember one thing, let it be this. Okay, remember 2 things. Embrace who you are. You are going to receive and provide the most joy in life if you are being true to who you are. So please do so. You know, in the last episode, I talked about how you are completely unique, and it's true. You have different experiences, different factors, different genetics, different everything from everybody else. And because of that, nobody else can bring what you can into this world. Here's another beautiful quote I want to share. It's this: what great accomplishments we would have if everybody had done what they intended to do. And that's by Frank Clark, I believe. I'll make sure on that. So if it's somebody else, I'll put that down in the show notes. But what a great quote. What if we all did what we wanted to do, what we felt called to do? In the Bible, Psalm 139 says that we were fearfully and wonderfully made. We were made as we were supposed to be. So let it out. Be yourself. You are completely wasting your life if you do not do that. You're going to give the most joy to others, and you're going to receive the most joy when you are true to who you are. So let's wrap this up. I'm going to say the 5 ways one more time for you. First of all, change what you can. Number 2, the exact opposite. Forget what you can't change. Number 3, replace the negative self-talk with the positive self-talk. 4, forgive yourself. And number 5, embrace who you are. I want to say this. I saw this the other day, and I would like to look into it more. But somebody was making a claim that the desire for self-improvement is a direct result of feelings of insufficient worth. I haven't really looked into it a whole lot, but I will, and I'll get back to you guys and bring it up in another episode. Here's what I want to say with that. Don't expect yourself to be perfect, because you never will be. Unless you happen to be the reincarnated Jesus Christ, you're going to make mistakes. You can have high goals, you can have expectations, but realize life is a stumbling process. We're moving forward, but we're honestly stumbling along the way. So, in moving forward, in the process of doing that, you can still be happy. You can still find joy. You can still recognize your own self-worth. Even if you don't feel like it, you are already worthy today. So please remember that. 3rd point, another thing you should remember, you are worthy today. That's all I want to say with that. I'm really looking forward to doing more of these podcasts. I've got some plans to do some interviews soon. Honestly, I would love to do those more often. They're just difficult. It's a challenge for me to get an episode out on a weekly basis when I'm at school, so it's even more difficult to try to do it with somebody else. I try my best, and I'm going to try to make sure we get some of those out soon. Until the next episode, make sure you stay connected with me on social media. I've been posting quite a bit. I'd love to hear from you guys, hear what your goals are, hear how your New Year's resolutions are going, hear about your life, hear about anything. So hit me up. I'm always down. I'm always down to talk. Until the next episode, remember the ion motive. Take charge of your being.